first set of questions are regarding learning more than one language at the same time. This is something that many webinar attendees were very interested in, and it seems like to me they do not have any time, and they want to reach your language goals as fast as possible, and the only way to do that is to start learning two languages at a time. So Melanie and William ask, can you learn more than one language at the same time, or is it better to learn one language at the time? Or and should you start the next language once you have reached a certain ability level, or are you overall faster if you're learning languages simultaneously? What is your take on that?
Well, it's a pretty general question. I would say that it really depends on the individual and on a number of factors. But normally, for a person who doesn't have that much experience in language learning, I always suggest they learn just one language at a time. Now, imagine that you have 10 years. You have a time budget of 10 years to learn 10 languages, right? So if you think, okay, I'm going to start 10 languages at the same time because, I have 10 years. Some people tend to think that if they do things at the same time, they actually gain time, they earn time by doing that. But especially in language learning, that is not quite true. First, because when you tackle two languages at the same time, what happens is that we build cores. We build language cores. Now, it's not just a problem of how many words we know and how we assemble together, but it's also a matter of feelings and emotions and experiences that come with that language. And if we learn two languages or three or four or even 10 at the same time, what happens is that sometimes they tend to mingle in your head. And you tend to confuse them sometimes.
Right.
Especially when you try to learn two languages that are similar. Let's suppose that as an American, you want to learn Italian, Spanish, and French at the same time. Mm-hmm. I still vividly remember a conversation with Richard. Richard is a fellow polyglot who told me that at the university, when he started learning, for example, Portuguese, Spanish, and and French, if memory serves me, if I remember correctly, he said that most students were actually very confused because they were trying to tackle very similar languages. Languages tend to overlap for a number of reasons. For example, Italian and Spanish, they tend to overlap for pronunciation because in a way it's very similar, and anally, morphology as well. Like many words are pretty similar. So I would say first, I suggest you learn just one language at a time because, as I said before, imagine if you have 10 years. If you learn, for example, two languages at the same time for 2 years, and then you move on to other languages, then you develop a certain capacity you acquire an ability, you form a language core in a certain language that is going to help you learn another language when two languages are similar. If you, for example, decide to learn German and Spanish at the beginning, and after a couple of years to try to tackle Italian, it will be much easier. Maybe at the beginning you're going to confuse them a little bit, but the fact that you have acquired a language core, so to say, so a structure, a layer in one language, it gives you a lot of help when it comes to building another language core, which is in a way similar. While if you try to build two language cores that are similar at the same time, they're going to overlap. So as a general guideline, I would say first, if you really want to learn multiple languages at the same time, I would say that 2 is the max.
Right.
So try to maybe 2 languages. So choose a maximum of 2 languages at any given time. Then choose 2 languages that are possibly distinct from one another. So they're different because, as I said before, if they're similar, they can overlap by way of words, grammar, emotions, memories, etc., etc. Try to use another I think useful piece of advice is try to choose an easy language and a relatively difficult one. Now, easy and difficult, it would take a century to explain the definition of that. But I would say that by easy language, I would say that it's a language that is similar in so many ways to yours. Right. An example is English and Dutch. Dutch is considered one of the easiest language for native English speakers for a number of reasons, or Italian, Spanish and Italian, for example, or Spanish and Portuguese. And another thing is once you've decided you have an easy language and a difficult one, you can organize your time accordingly and better because, for example, you can dedicate 70 to 80% of your time to the difficult language and 20-30% of your time to an easier language that requires less effort. And I did that, for example, when I started learning Portuguese and Chinese. I dedicated 80% of my time to Chinese, but I also allocated some time to Portuguese. At the end of my Chinese session, I started learning a little bit of Portuguese, and that was very helpful because just 15 to 30 minutes a day of Portuguese helped me. In 6 months, I was already fluent because Portuguese is very, very similar to Spanish, a language that I already learned. If I learned Portuguese and Spanish at the same time, it would have been a disaster for my brain. And the last thing that I wanted to add is that when you learn two languages at the same time, remember to study both of them every day. So don't do any sort of rotation, meaning you study a language for a week, and then you study another language the next week, because as I said before, you have to give your brain the possibility of growing. And if you want that to happen, you have to give it every day some pieces of information. If you, for example, you study a language for 1 week, and then you study another one, what about the first language during the second week? You're not going to do anything. So the amount of information that you accumulate in your brain goes down, and then you have to take it back again. So
right.
Organizing your time efficiently is very important, and try to study every single day both languages. The more languages you learn, obviously, the more time you need, the more time and energy you need. So just decide what kind of investment you want to make. And if you have maybe 10 hours a day to study languages, then you can possibly tackle 3-4 languages. Nobody can keep you from doing that. But remember that the more languages you learn, the more difficult it gets to organize your time and not to mix languages.